In this clip, we're going to begin to put all the pieces together. We will demonstrate an entire Warsaw Pact hasty attack operation from soup to nuts. In this example, the Warsaw Pact player is executing the activation cycle for his 39th Guards Motor Rifle Division. He has just completed his last operation. He is ready for his next operation. During the commitment step, he declares that he is activating the 172nd Guards Motor Rifle Regiment with units here, here, and here. He reveals that the operations marker for the 172nd Guards on his Warsaw Pact planning card is a hasty attack, and he also indicates that the objective for this hasty attack is the NATO Bradley unit defending Hasty. That ends the commitment step of the operation. Play proceeds to the movement step. Analyzing the situation, the Warsaw Pact player realizes that it will be possible for the NATO player to react into the objective hex with this force here, or potentially this force here, or potentially this force here. These are all options that he wants to try and close down for the NATO player. He also realizes that the 1st Brigade headquarters back here is in command range of the objective hex and also of this unfired M109 battalion here, and therefore the NATO player will probably be able to make a fire call for his defensive fire, another option that the Warsaw Pact player wants to shut down. So he decides to take a risk, and he moves his first unit, 1 movement point here, and then 2 movement points here, triggering infiltration fire here, and also forcing him to run the contact procedure where he reveals to the NATO player that he's got 6 steps, and the NATO player reveals that he's got 2 Bradley companies defending Hasty. So, having triggered infiltration fire here, the NATO player executes it. So he is going to be firing with an attack strength of 4 times 2 steps for a basic fire strength of 8. That will be doubled for infiltration fire into a clear terrain hex, so the 8 becomes 16, and then back to 8 with the standard division by 2. So the effective fire strength of this fire combat is an 8. The NATO player rolls the die and is unfortunately very unlucky. He rolls a 1. That produces a -3 hit modifier on the CRT, so the 8 becomes a 5. The NATO player has inflicted 5 hits. The Warsaw Pact player absorbs 3 of those hits by losing a step and can ignore the remaining 2 hits as insufficient to claim another step. The Warsaw Pact player had expended 2 movement points to get here. He now continues his movement 3, 4, 5, and ends up in the rear of the American positions. He then starts to move his next unit, and he's going to take another risk by moving onto this minefield. It's not that the Soviet player wants to move onto a potential minefield, but he knows that he needs a unit here to be able to execute retreat fire here and here, since this other unit will be able to retreat fire here and here, and that effectively cuts off the American force. So he goes 1, 2, 3 into this hex and reveals to the NATO player that he's coming in with 3 steps. The NATO player reveals that this minefield is actually real. The Warsaw Pact player consults the minefield chart and sees that normally he would have to roll for each step and he would lose a step on a die roll of 1, but because this minefield is in an enemy ZOC, there's a DRM of -1 added to his die roll, so now he will lose a step in this unit every time he rolls a 1 or a 2. 3 steps he must roll 3 times, so he rolls a 4, an 8, and a 6. So he loses no steps. Lucky Warsaw Pact player. The Warsaw Pact player declines to move his last unit here, since it's actually a dummy and is basically just holding the flank. So that ends the movement step of the operation. The next step is the jamming step. The Warsaw Pact player has an unused EW asset under his forward headquarters, and that headquarters is within range of an attacking unit, so he can use the jamming. Consulting the jamming table, The Warsaw Pact player rolls the die and receives a 7. This means that his EW asset has survived the jamming attempt. However, he must now apply any die roll modifiers that apply. The NATO player is going to receive a -2 DRM for occupying a hex containing an improved position, a -1 DRM for defending in an objective hex containing close terrain, in this case the town that the American unit occupies, and finally an additional -1 DRM for being a NATO unit defending in a town, where the NATO player benefits from direct access to the public telephone network. That's a total of a -4 die roll modifier. So the 7 that the Warsaw Pact player rolled becomes a 3, which means that the jamming attempt has no effect on the NATO player's ability to call for fire support or to react into the objective hex. So, effectively, it has failed. This takes us to NATO's reaction step. However, the NATO player cannot now react because the Soviet player has ensured that any reacting force would have to move adjacent to an enemy unit before it ever entered the objective hex, which it is not allowed to do. So the Soviet player has effectively cut the Bradleys off from any friendly reinforcement. We skip the reaction step and go straight to the defensive fire call step. The NATO player was not jammed, so the 1st Brigade headquarters here makes a fire call to the M109 battalion here to participate in this combat. For actual defensive fire, the NATO player decides that what he will do is use his artillery units to target this hex, and he will use the 2 Bradley units to target this hex. The artillery unit fires with a 4 × 3 steps for 12. Standard division by 2 drops that to 6. So, effective fire strength of 6. Rolls the die, rolls a 5. No modifications, 6 hits are inflicted. The Warsaw Pact player absorbs 3 hits by losing a step and another 3 hits by losing a 2nd step, absorbing all 6 hits. The NATO player then executes this defensive fire here. So his Bradleys are 4 × 2 steps for 8, doubled for being infantry defending in close terrain in the objective hex, to 16. Standard division by 2 knocks that back to 8. The NATO player rolls the die. That is a 4, which is a -1, so his 8 becomes a 7. The Soviet player has an adjusted defense strength of 3 + 1 for being in cover as an attacker, so his adjusted defense strength is 4. He loses a step, absorbs 4 hits, and the remaining 3 hits he can ignore is insufficient to take another step. That ends the NATO player's defensive fire. Play now proceeds to the offensive fire call step. The Warsaw Pact player, for a hasty attack, is allowed by the fire support chart for offensive fire support. For a hasty attack, he can throw in 1 artillery unit. Conveniently, the Warsaw Pact player has his DAG available here, and so his forward headquarters makes a call to the DAG to support the fire. The Warsaw Pact player determines that he's got an attack strength of 4 × 3 steps here, so that's a 12. This unit has a basic fire strength of 4 × 2 steps, or 8. However, it occupies a minefield which halves its fire strength, so it's only a 4. So we've got a 12 here and a 4 here for a total of 16. To that we now add the fire strength of the DAG, which is 6 × 3, so we've got a total of 18. Adding 16 and 18, we get to 34. Standard division by 2 takes that to a 17. The Warsaw Pact player rolls the die, and he rolls a 9. So the 17 hits goes up to 19 hits. The NATO player's defense strength is a native 3, plus 4 for the town, plus 2 for the improved position, for a grand total of a defense strength, adjusted defense strength of 9. The Warsaw Pact player has just inflicted 19 hits. The NATO player can absorb the first 9 hits by electing to retreat. So he's absorbing the adjusted defense strength of his strongest unit in the hex, which is a 9, by electing to retreat. That absorbs 9 of the 19 hits, leaving 10 hits still to be absorbed. So he must lose 1 step. He must now execute the retreat during the retreat step. Looking at his options here, the best hex for him to retreat into would be either this hex here or this hex here, because this unit on the minefield is the weakest unit. However, by the rules for the retreat priorities, he must attempt not to retreat further from a friendly headquarters, which means that this is, in fact, his best option. So he elects to retreat here. This retreat triggers retreat fire because this BMP unit has a ZOC into this hex. So the Soviet player is going to fire with a basic fire strength of 4. That fire strength is halved because the unit is on a minefield, but it is doubled for a retreat fire into a cleaner terrain hex. So it remains a basic fire strength of 8. Standard division by 2 knocks that down to a 4. So the Soviet player is firing with 4. He rolls a die. He rolls a 4, which is a -1 hit modifier. So the fire of 4 drops to 3, but 3 is still sufficient to claim 1 step from this Bradley unit. So the Bradley unit is eliminated. That concludes the retreat step. This improved position marker is now removed because the hex has been cleared by enemy fire, and the Warsaw Pact player can now elect to advance in. So he chooses to advance these 3 steps in here. He could also choose to advance from here, but if he did, he would accept another mine attack. So the Warsaw Pact player declines to advance out of that hex because he doesn't want to take the risk of losing more steps. That concludes the advance step, so we now move to the completion step, where it removes the lead unit marker, and there are no participating attack helicopters to return to the recovery box, but we do need to place a fired marker on this artillery unit, and we also need to place a fired marker on this artillery unit. And finally, these units have now completed their operation, so they flip, including the regimental unit that did not move. And that's the end of the operation.